She was left at the altar, but the millionaire boss whispered, "Pretend I'm the groom." The church organ had stopped playing for almost 4 minutes. 4 minutes that felt like 4 hours to the person standing up front, holding the bouquet with both fists clenched, with 300 pairs of eyes fixed on her back. Maya couldn't turn around. If she turned around, she would have to face those people. Her mother's neighbor, sitting in the second row, was already whispering with her hand over her mouth. Aunt Brenda, on the opposite side of the aisle, had her handkerchief tucked under her nose, and her mother, Mrs. Martha, 67 years old, her white hair arranged in that bun she only did for important occasions, was sitting in the first row on the left with an expression Maya knew all too well. It wasn't surprise. It was that look of someone who knew things would go wrong and kept quiet. But the groom wasn't there. Tyler should have arrived 20 minutes ago. That was the plan. The car was confirmed. The priest was in position. The white flowers on the sides of the altar were perfect. Everything was in place. Except him. It was Jordan, Tyler's best friend and best man, who approached from the side aisle of the sacristy. He came with steps too fast and a face too pale. He got close to Maya's ear and said 3 words. Just 3. She would never forget those 3 words as long as she lived. "He's not coming." Maya stood still. Her knees didn't buckle. The tears didn't come all at once like in movie scenes. They came differently, in waves, starting with the stinging in her eyes, then the tightness in her throat, then that pressure in her chest that felt like a hand squeezing from the inside. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. And it was at that exact moment that someone approached from the right side. Firm steps, deliberate, different from Jordan's hurried ones. She recognized him before even seeing his face. She recognized him by the way the air shifted slightly, by that subtle cologne she had learned to associate with mornings at the office, with meetings that started at 8 sharp, with the corrections to the contract that he always made with a red pen. Nathan Brooks, her boss. He was wearing a black suit, his dark hair neatly combed back, the little white flower in his lapel, because Maya herself had asked all the groomsmen to wear a little white flower. Yes, Nathan was a groomsman at the wedding. She had asked him 6 months ago on an ordinary workday, casually, almost like asking if she could leave early on Friday. He had said yes. Of course, yes. Now he was beside her, so close that the words coming from his mouth reached only her. Only she heard them. "Maya." His voice was low and very calm. "Look at me." She looked. And when her eyes met his, the first loose strands of the veil had already stuck to her face from the tears she hadn't even realized were streaming down. "Pretend I'm the groom." Her jaw dropped. She thought she had misheard. "I know what you're thinking," he said without taking his eyes off hers, "but this is the only thing that will get you out of here with your head held high. Afterward, you can do whatever you want. Right now, you're not going to walk out of here falling apart. You don't deserve that." 300 pairs of eyes. The murmur that slowly grew. The priest, looking at the two of them, not quite understanding. Maya felt something strange happen inside her at that moment. It wasn't relief. Not yet. It was just that feeling of having solid ground beneath your feet when you thought you were about to sink. She took a deep breath and turned to the audience with Nathan by her side. I had to pause here for a second when I first read this part, because there's something about this image, this moment, that goes beyond the obvious. It's not just someone being saved in front of everyone. It's someone having to make an impossible decision in less than 3 seconds, and I kept thinking, what would I have done? Mrs. Martha was the only person in that church who didn't show surprise when Nathan appeared next to his daughter. She watched the scene with her eyes slightly narrowed, the handkerchief carefully folded in her lap, and just pressed her lips together in a gesture that could be interpreted as relief or as guilt. It depended on who was looking at her. The ceremony didn't happen. It would have been impossible to pretend to that point. The priest, a middle-aged man with a soft voice, understood the situation with enormous delicacy and invited everyone to a brief prayer before they dispersed. It was the kindest way anyone could have ended it. Nathan stayed by Maya's side through it all. When people came up with faces full of pity and words they weren't sure about, it was he who responded with a polite phrase and created space for her to breathe. When Aunt Brenda wanted to hug her niece for too long, it was Nathan's hand on her shoulder that interrupted the embrace with a gentle pat of farewell. He didn't talk much. He was just there. Outside in the church atrium, with the garden flowers swaying in a warm breeze, Maya stared at the bouquet she still held. White flowers, roses and lilies. She had chosen each one carefully on a Saturday afternoon 3 weeks ago with the florist on Market Street. 3 weeks. Her life had still made sense 3 weeks ago. "Do you need water?" Nathan asked. "I need an explanation," she replied, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. He said nothing for a moment. "Did Jordan tell you what happened?" she asked. "No." "Then you know something that I don't." Silence. "Nathan." He turned his face to the side, looking at the garden flowers, and Maya saw something move in that controlled expression. A hesitation. Small, but it was there. "This isn't the right time for that," he said finally. "There's no right time to hear that your fiancé has vanished." Her voice trembled on the last words, but she didn't look away. "If you know something, tell me now." He took a deep breath, turned toward her, and Maya saw, in those dark, serious eyes that she had looked into so many times from across a work table, that what he was about to say would cost him something. Tyler had been having serious financial difficulties for over a year, debts he hadn't told you about. "I found out because we have common contacts in real estate, and his name started to circulate in a way that wasn't good." He paused. "I thought I should tell you, and I went to talk to your mother." Maya didn't blink. "To my mother?" "Yes, 4 months ago." The bouquet slipped slightly from her hands. She didn't let it fall. She gripped it tighter. "And what did my mother tell you?" Nathan looked at her for a long second before answering. "She asked me not to say anything." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. That helps us a lot who are just starting out, now continuing. There is a specific pain we feel when we discover that the people who love us most made a decision about our lives without telling us. A pain that isn't anger yet, that comes before anger. That feeling that the ground you were standing on was different from what you imagined. That was the pain Maya felt there in the church atrium, still in her lace dress. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She turned her back on Nathan, walked 3 steps to the stone bench that sat in the shade of an oak tree and sat down. She placed the bouquet beside her, folded her hands in her lap, and stayed quiet for a time that was impossible to measure. Nathan stood where he was, at that respectful distance of someone who understands that there are times when your presence does more harm than good. Mrs. Martha showed up a few minutes later, with her bun slightly undone on the left side, and her eyes red. She came slowly, like someone who knows she'll have to give an explanation and is preparing for it as she walks. She sat down next to her daughter on the stone bench without asking permission. "I needed to protect you," she said. "Did you need to protect me, or were you afraid of losing me?" Maya's answer came without a pause. Mrs. Martha stayed quiet, and that silence said more than any answer could have. Maya turned to her mother. She looked at that face she had known forever, with the wrinkles around the eyes that had appeared over time, with that forehead that had always known how to carry worries without letting everyone see. "You knew he was deceiving me. For 4 months you stayed quiet." "I didn't know if it was the debts or something else," Mrs. Martha said, and her voice came out low. "I thought maybe he'd figure it out, that maybe it was a rough patch and it would pass." "Mom." "I know." The words came out broken. "I know I messed up, my dear. I know." What happened in the following hours was the kind of thing you can only process much later, when the weight of the day fades. Maya was taken by her cousin Paige to the family home, swapped her wedding dress for a simple blouse and a pair of sweatpants, and spent the afternoon sitting on the back porch, staring at the garden while the closest guests silently took down the decorations that had been set up that morning for a party that wasn't going to happen. No one mentioned Tyler for many hours. When the subject finally came up, it was because of a phone call. Maya's cell phone rang around 5 in the afternoon. Unknown number. She answered only because she was in a state where everything seemed equally surreal. It was Tyler. His voice came out hoarse, like someone who had spent hours trying to find the right words and hadn't found a single good one. "I know I have no right to call." Maya said nothing. "I just needed you to know it wasn't because I didn't love you." "Tyler." Her voice was absolutely calm. "Do you know what's worse? That I believe that. And it makes all the difference to me, and no difference at all at the same time." On the other end, silence. "You could have told me about the debts," she said, "at any point in the last year. I would have listened. I would have tried to understand. You chose to hide it. And today, on the day the lie got too big to carry, you walked out the back door. I panicked. I know." She closed her eyes. "And that's why I'm not angry with you right now. I'm angry with myself for not paying more attention." The call lasted a few more minutes. When it ended, Maya sat staring at the garden for a long time, phone in hand. Then she placed the device face down on the table and stayed there, quiet, without needing to explain anything to anyone. Mrs. Martha appeared at the porch door a little later with a mug of tea that Maya hadn't asked for. She set it on the table without saying anything, but she stood near the door, as if she wanted to say something and didn't know where to start. "I need to ask you something," Maya said without turning around. "Go ahead and ask. Why did you go talk to Nathan? Why didn't you come talk to me?" Mrs. Martha took a moment before answering. "Because I didn't want to be the one to break that. I thought if you heard it from an outsider, from someone with no emotional stake in the situation, it would be different." She paused. "But when Nathan told me, I could see from the way he spoke that he did have a stake. Just a different kind than I thought at first." Maya turned around now. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Martha walked to the straw chair beside her daughter and sat down slowly, as people do when they feel the weight of the years bending their knees. "That man didn't come to me out of professional obligation, my dear. He came because he was worried about you. There's a huge difference in that choice." She clasped her hands in her lap, the same gesture as always. "I was wrong to ask him to keep quiet, but I wasn't wrong to notice what I saw in his eyes." Maya stared at her mother for a long time. "You're 67 years old, and you still try to run other people's lives," she said. But there was no harshness in her voice. There was something that almost seemed like tenderness, a tenderness that hurts because it comes hand in hand with hurt. "I'm 67 years old, and I still make the same old mistakes," Mrs. Martha corrected, with a hint of irony that was characteristic of her. Maya picked up the mug of tea. She took the first sip. It was too hot, slightly burning her tongue, but she drank it anyway. Nathan showed up the next morning. He didn't go to the office to get a document signed, nor did he send a message through the work app. He went to Maya's house at 8 in the morning with a bag from the bakery and the same black suit from the day before, without the little flower on the lapel, slightly wrinkled, like someone who hadn't slept much. She opened the door and looked at him for a moment. "You could have sent a message," she said. "I could have. But you came in person because you knew I'd need to hear that face to face." He nodded slightly. She opened the door wider, and he walked in. They sat at the small kitchen table. He opened the bakery bag, placed 2 still warm fresh bagels on a napkin, and pushed one toward her side without ceremony. Maya noticed that he knew she liked fresh bagels because during morning meetings she always took 2 when the receptionist brought them. He had noticed that detail. In how much time? "I needed to apologize," he said. "For which part?" "For going to talk to your mother instead of talking to you directly." Maya stared at the fresh bagel. "Why did you go talk to her?" Nathan rested his hands on the table. Large, firm, those hands she had seen sign contracts and pound the table during tough meetings. "Because I knew that if I went to talk to you, I wouldn't be able to keep it just professional. I'd end up stepping out of the place I needed to stay in to keep working with you the way it was working." The silence that followed was a different kind from the silences of the day before. It wasn't the silence of pain. It was the silence of 2 people understanding something at the same time. "You're telling me you were afraid to tell me about Tyler because otherwise you'd have to tell me something else too," she said slowly. "I am." Maya looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the fresh bagel. Then she picked it up and took a bite. Nathan almost smiled. Almost. "You're 42 years old," she said, still chewing. "I am. And you run a company that employs 70 people. 73. And you spent 4 months unable to tell me something out of fear." He didn't answer that, because there was no good answer. "I was a coward too," she said then, and her voice came out softer. "I saw things in Tyler that didn't make sense, and I pretended they did. It's easier to pretend." He nodded. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. That helps us beginners a lot. Now continuing. "What were you thinking when you said what you said to me at the church yesterday?" Maya began after a moment. "When you told me to pretend, what was going through your head at that moment?" Nathan placed his elbows on the table, interlaced his fingers, as he did when he was thinking about a hard problem to solve. "I've been watching you since the music stopped," he said. "I saw you holding that bouquet. I saw Jordan whisper in your ear. I saw your shoulders change. There's something that happens in a person's back when they get really bad news. A different way of carrying the weight. I saw it in you." Maya didn't say anything. She was listening carefully. "And I thought about what would be worse, leaving that church destroyed in front of everyone, or leaving with whatever was left of you still intact. It wasn't a plan. It was the only thing that made sense in that second. But what if I had said no? You didn't. But what if I had?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Then I would have stayed by your side anyway, just without the disguise." Maya stared at those intertwined hands on the table. She thought about things that weren't easy to think about. She thought about the 3 years with Tyler, about all the signs she had ignored, not out of naivety, but by choice. She thought about her mother, on the stone bench in the atrium, with that expression of someone who had carried a secret for 4 months, thinking she was protecting her. She thought about Nathan, going to talk to Mrs. Martha, because he was afraid he wouldn't be able to control himself if he spoke directly to her. How much misplaced love could fit into a single story? "You know what's funny?" she said. "It's not funny, actually. It's just weird. I spent these 6 months of the engagement thinking that Nathan Brooks was just my boss, an important figure in my professional life, someone I respected a lot, but inside a very defined little box. And now I find out you went to my mother's house, carried a piece of information that weighed on you for 4 months, became my best man, because I asked and you couldn't say no. And yesterday, you stood by my side in an entire church watching me. I know how it looks. It looks honest," she said. "It looks a lot more honest than what I was used to." The days that followed were difficult in a different way. Maya went back to work the following Wednesday. There was no other way to face it but to go back to life, because life doesn't stop for an empty altar. She arrived at the office at 8:20, 5 minutes before Nathan, and when he arrived and saw her at her desk with the computer already open, he simply said good morning and went to his office. What a good morning that was. Maya found herself thinking about that good morning longer than she should have. The weeks passed with that strange normalcy of things that had changed, but still pretended they hadn't. They worked. They talked about contracts, about clients, about the new projects coming in. But there was a different quality to those conversations now, a layer that existed beneath the words and that both pretended not to notice, because noticing would require a decision. It was Mrs. Martha, as always, who broke through everyone's hesitation. She showed up at the office on a Thursday afternoon without warning. Maya was in a meeting with a client, and it took her almost half an hour to get free. When she came out, she found her mother sitting in the waiting chair at the reception with her purse on her lap, chatting with the receptionist about cake recipes as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "What are you doing here?" Maya asked. "I came to talk to Nathan." "Mom, already did." Mrs. Martha stood up with that firmness of someone who doesn't ask for permission. "I apologized for asking him to keep quiet, and I told him I was old enough to know when someone acts from something true, that was what I had seen in him and that he didn't need to be afraid of what was true." Maya looked at her mother for a long moment. Was she angry? Not exactly. There was that familiar amazement with Mrs. Martha, who spent her whole life making the same mistake of wanting to fix things for the people she loved, but who sometimes, in rare moments, hit exactly the right mark. "And what did he say?" Maya asked. Mrs. Martha shrugged slightly. "He said thank you and offered me a coffee. Very good coffee here, by the way. I don't know if you have someone like that in your life. A person who gets in your way and saves you at the same time, who errs out of too much love, who can't stay out of things but whose heart you would never doubt. I did. And every time I read about a Mrs. Martha, I feel like I know that woman from somewhere." It was on the Friday of the following week that Nathan lightly knocked on the door of Maya's office, which was smaller than his but had a better window. "May I come in?" "You may." He stood at the door for a second, with that expression she already knew how to read, the expression of someone who has organized what they're going to say, but isn't sure how it will come out. "I wanted to ask you something that isn't work-related." "Go ahead. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" Just like that. No speech, no elaborate build-up. Maya looked at him. She thought about all the layers that had led to this point, the empty altar, the whisper no one else had heard, the work mornings that now seemed to have had another conversation happening beneath the surface, the stone bench with her mother, the fresh bagels on the kitchen table, everything that had crumbled so that this moment could exist. It wasn't simple. It was complicated in a way she didn't yet know if it would be good or hard, or both at the same time. But there was one thing she knew, and knew with a clarity she had never felt with Tyler. Nathan Brooks was a person who showed up. "Tonight works," she said, and the almost smile turned into a full smile for the first time. That night, at a simple restaurant near downtown, with an old wooden table and a small candle in the middle, Maya and Nathan talked for 3 hours. About things that weren't work, about his childhood in a small inland town he had left at 16 and never truly returned to, about her mother, who had raised Maya alone after her father left when she was 8, and who learned to care in a way that sometimes smothered, but never failed in the essentials. About marriages that had worked and those that had sunk, including a brief marriage Nathan had had at 31 that had ended more from incompatibility than drama. There was no rush in that conversation. It was the conversation of two people who had gotten there by a long path and knew they didn't need to hurry. On the way out, when the night air was cool and smelled of wet earth from a rain that had fallen earlier, Nathan stood next to her on the sidewalk. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Another one? This one is different from the others." He looked at her for a moment. "Yesterday, when you asked me what I would have done if you had said no at the church, I said I would have stayed by your side anyway. And that was true. But there's another truth that goes with it." "What?" "That I was relieved when you didn't say no." Maya stood still for a moment. Then she said something she hadn't planned to say, but it came out with a naturalness that surprised even herself. "Me too." 3 months later, Maya and Nathan went to Mrs. Martha's house for Sunday dinner. She made pot roast and homemade potato salad, opened a bottle of sparkling cider she'd been saving for special occasions, and stayed in the kitchen pretending to be busy while the two of them talked in the living room, until Nathan got up, walked into the kitchen, and said he needed help putting together the dessert. Mrs. Martha stared at him for a second, then she raised an eyebrow. "You don't know how to put dessert together." "I don't, but I wanted to tell you something." "Go ahead." "Thank you for coming to the office last week. I know you did it for Maya, but it helped." Mrs. Martha was quiet for a moment. She turned to the sink, washed her hands, dried them slowly on the embroidered dish towel. Then she said, without turning around, "When you're 67 years old, you learn that making mistakes is part of it. The thing is not to make the same mistake twice." "That's good advice." "Take care of her," she said, and she went back to the salad without another word. Nathan went back to the living room with a bowl of custard pie he'd taken from the fridge without asking. He set it in the center of the table. Maya looked at the bowl, then at him. "You went to talk to my mother again." "I did." "How did it go?" "Good." He sat down. "She told me she learns from her own mistakes." Maya looked toward the kitchen door, where the sounds of pots and the smell of chicken still warming came from. Then she looked at the man sitting across the table with the custard pie between them, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. She had gotten here by a path she would never have chosen. Through an empty altar and a whisper, and 4 months of secrets, and a mother who made mistakes with the right heart. But she had arrived, and the ground beneath her feet felt solid in a different way, in a way she still couldn't quite name, but that she recognized as real. Sometimes things have to fall apart, in the most unexpected way for something true to find room to be built. End of story. Maya didn't choose this path, but the path she didn't choose was the one that brought her to the place where things finally made sense. I think about that a lot when I hear stories like this. We spend so much time trying to control the script that sometimes we don't realize that the most important moments come precisely when the script slips out of our hands. Thank you for sticking with me from beginning to end today. If this story touched you in any way, leave a comment telling me what you felt, where you're watching from, and what you would have done in Maya's place back in that atrium. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories.